boys and girls. We're going to continue today talking about apples. I'm going to read you a book today about Johnny Appleseed. Okay, this book was written after a real person, but there are some things in the story that's not quite real about him, but some of the things are very similar. Johnny Appleseed. Red, green, yellow apples, Macintosh, Rome, Red Delicious. Take your pick. Apples grow just about everywhere in America. It wasn't always that way. A long time ago, there were very few apples in America. Then a man called Johnny Appleseed came along, and this is his story. Johnny Appleseed was an actual person, but his real name was John Chapman. He was born in 1774 in a small town called Leominster, which was near Boston, Massachusetts. That was a long time ago. In the past, Johnny's family owned a farm, and his favorite spot was the apple orchard. In the spring, he'd sit under the trees, listen to the birds, and smell the wonderful scent of the apple blossoms. In the summer, he'd care for the trees so they would give plenty of delicious apples in the fall. Even after he had grown up, Johnny was happy working in the apple orchards, and when his work was done, he would watch the wagons passing by. The wagons were heading west, out to a new land. People told Johnny that they were going to settle in a great new wilderness. They talked about rich soil that was good for growing things. Is this how we travel today? No, that's how they traveled in the past, a long time ago. The more stories Johnny heard, the more curious he became. He had never been away from his father's farm. Now he wanted to see these new lands for himself. He wanted to go out west too to see the new land, didn't he? There aren't any apple orchards out west, said Mr. Chapman, hoping his son would stay home. Johnny was surprised when he heard this. How could people not have apples to eat? Dad, that's a good reason for going, said Johnny. People need apples. I'll go west and plant apple trees. So off he went. He packed as many apple seeds as he could carry. He took some books, and he took an old cooking pot, which he wore on his head for a hat. He walked over hills and valleys and passed through small towns. He walked and walked for weeks and weeks from Massachusetts all the way to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And there he is, carrying a little sack with his apple seeds and the things he needed. There's his hat, which was an old pot. The land in Pittsburgh was rich and good for growing things, so Johnny settled there. He bought some land, built a cabin, and started growing apple trees. When people passed by, Johnny gave them some apple seeds or small young seedlings to take with them. Plant these seeds when you get out west, Johnny called, and peace be with you. But all too often, people returned with the sad tale either that they had lost the seeds or that the seedlings had died. Johnny was disappointed. There must be a way to get apple trees growing out west, he thought. Then he had an idea, a wonderful idea. I will go myself. So the only way there will be apple trees is if I plant the seeds myself. So once again, Johnny packed his seeds and headed west. Along the way, he stopped and planted his seeds. Sometimes he would rest at a farmer's cabin. Then Johnny would plant apple seeds in the farmer's field. Sometimes Johnny would stay with friendly Indians. He knew how to use herbs to cure the sick, and he was always welcome. If he had time, he would plant some apple seeds too. But most of the time, Johnny was alone. He slept in the forest and ate the foods from the land, plants and fruits and nuts, and he made friends with every animal in the forest. He was kind and careful with all the creatures he met. The years passed quickly. Johnny was no longer a young man. His hair grew thick and tangled. His clothes grew torn and ragged, and the pot on his head turned rusty and dented. You can imagine how strange Johnny looked when he walked into a new town and knocked on someone's door. But he was always welcome. There was something about him that people liked. Folks began to tell stories about Johnny. They loved to talk about the Apple Man and the orchards he planted. Whenever people talked about Johnny, they called him Johnny Appleseed. He was becoming a legend. Everybody was talking about him. They especially liked to tell stories about Johnny and his animal friends. And the story they liked best was the story about Johnny and his friend the wolf. One day Johnny was planting apple seeds in a clearing in a forest, and suddenly he heard a growling noise behind him. He turned and saw a gray wolf caught in a hunter's trap. Johnny dropped his seeds and ran to help the wolf. See his foot caught in that trap? Ouch. Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you, Johnny said gently. Then he forced the trap open. The wolf's leg was bleeding from the trap. Johnny quickly put a bandage on the wound. The wolf was so grateful that he licked Johnny's hand. Johnny nursed the wolf back to health. When the wolf's leg was better, Johnny packed his things and prepared to leave. As Johnny started to walk away, the wolf got up and followed him. He wanted to be Johnny's friend. From that day on, Johnny and the wolf traveled together. The wolf helped Johnny plant his seeds, and Johnny taught the wolf to be kind and gentle. Do you think this part really happened? Probably not. A wolf is not going to help plant seeds, and you can't really teach a wolf to be kind and gentle. Farmers welcomed Johnny into their homes. They liked to hear the story of how Johnny found the wolf. They liked to hear about the towns Johnny had visited and the things he had seen. The farmers' children loved the little presents Johnny gave them, bright ribbons for the girls and smooth stones for the boys, and they liked to play with Johnny's gray wolf. Could you play with a wolf? No, a wolf is a wild animal. We don't get near them. One day a terrible thing happened. Johnny and the wolf had traveled to a strange part of the country. They walked up to a cabin in the woods, and a man with a gun was at the door. Johnny called to the wolf, but it was too late. A shot rang out, and the wolf fell dead. The man had never heard of Johnny Appleseed. He did not know that the wolf was Johnny's friend. Sadly, Johnny carried the wolf away and buried him in a quiet place in the forest. "Goodbye, my friend," he said. Then Johnny turned and walked on alone. There was still work to be done. Johnny traveled through Ohio, Kentucky, and Indiana. He walked as far west as Missouri planting his apple seeds, but he was growing old and tired. He was more than 70 years old, and he had been planting apple trees for many, many years. It was time to rest. One spring day, Johnny stopped at an orchard in Indiana. He had planted that orchard many years before. The sweet apple blossoms reminded him of his boyhood. He decided to sit under the tree and smell the wonderful scent of the apple blossoms. Folks wondered what had happened to Johnny Appleseed. He was not seen around the countryside again. Some said he had died, but everywhere they looked, people saw Johnny's mark up on the land. Wonderful apple trees were growing everywhere, and everyone knew they were the work of one man, a man called Johnny Appleseed. The end. So that is the story about Johnny Appleseed. Again, there was a real man named John Chapman, and they called him Johnny Appleseed. And he did go around planting apple seeds and growing apple trees. But some of the things and some of the stories we hear are not real. They couldn't really happen. Hope you enjoyed Johnny Appleseed.